If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Outdoors people. Have you ever seen or felt the presence of something not human? Entity, forest spirits, bipedals, other creatures, etc. What happened? So on the night of November 1st of this year, I was taking my dog out, and I looked down the street from my house to see a strange-looking creature walking across the street. I saw it for a second or two, and I'll describe it as best I can. The first features I noticed in my short glimpse of it were these two ridiculously long bony pitch black legs, a back that sloped downwards, and these two short front legs and a head that poked out the front. My first reaction in my head was, back inside, now. My dog saw the creature too and immediately wanted back inside. This was the only experience I've had like this, and I'm hoping I'm not the only one who has seen a creature like this. Until this incident, I was never a believer in anything paranormal. We went to Maltby Cemetery in Washington. The place has a lot of creepy urban legends, but I never bought it. We get there, and it's before dusk and a little bit of a hike. We got there to explore with flashlights and take some pictures, and let me tell you, it's a creepy little hike. We get up there, and it's silent and creepy. We can't hear the wind, but we can feel it. We're seeing cars down the valley but can't hear anything. The air felt hard to breathe in. We decided to cut things short and head home because it was just an all-around odd trip. I left my knapsack by a tombstone, went to get it with my headlamp in, and then was going to meet my friend down the trail. Brand new batteries are in that headlamp. The minute they were out of sight, I couldn't hear them anymore, and it creeped me out, so I was hustling to get my stuff and go. Suddenly, at one moment, all this SHT happens at once. The headlamp goes out. Something screams in my ear, and I feel something rake across my back. I left all my shit and bolted and tripped on a tombstone, and when I fell, I thought I was a goner. I got up and bolted. I made it to my friends. They didn't hear anything, but as soon as we passed the opening of the cemetery, we could hear the wind and cars. We felt like we were watched the entire time down to the car, so we pretty much ran. When we got home, we looked at my back, and I had giant scratches. I have been terrified since. Every day after work, I'd sometimes walk to our neighborhood playground to swing and relax. This was usually between 11 and midnight, so I didn't have to worry about kids running around. A large wooded area sat directly behind the playground. One night, as I was swinging, I felt something watching me from the woods. I tried to dismiss my sudden paranoia, but the feeling only grew. I tried arguing with myself to be rational. It was probably some nocturnal animal like a deer or owl. The feeling of being watched turned into the feeling of being prey. I felt that whatever was watching me was predatory and curious. I sat still on the swing, listening for anything but only hearing silence. A jolt went through my body, like it was screaming at me. Danger! Go! Now! I immediately started walking back to my house. I felt it in my bones that if I ran, it would chase me. I called a friend on my cell in case whatever it was did come after me. As soon as I turned a corner and the woods and playground were out of sight, the feeling of being in danger left. I've never felt anything like it before or sensed it. I'm very much aware it could have been nothing. However, it could have been a wild boar, stray dog, drifter, or something else. Whatever it was, I'll never go back there at night. I was driving my cousin home, and we both saw a massive, 10-foot-tall humanoid figure in the distance. It was about the size of a one-story house. It darted behind a building, and we went to look for it, but when we rounded the corner, it was nowhere in sight. I'm freaking out with paranoia right now because I know what I saw. Nobody believes me and my cousin, but I saw what I saw. Anyone have any ideas what it could be? It was tall and slender, and it almost looked like the front half of a deer if it were more human, if that makes any sense. This happened about a year ago. I was back home from college. It was winter break. Anyhow, back home we don't have a heating system or air conditioning, so sometimes during breaks it's either really hot or really cold. This usually requires me to put on about 3 or 4 blankets to not freeze. Well, the night it happened, I decided not to use anything other than a small blanket. Temperatures over the night just kept going lower, and in the middle of the night, I faintly woke up, shaking from how cold I was. I swear I saw something or someone walking to my room. Now, it was pretty late in the night, and I know sometimes my mother wakes up to go get ready for work. Thinking it was my mom, I didn't question it. All I could see from this lady was her silhouette. She had no facial features or any distinguishable features. Anyway, she goes to where we usually keep the blankets and puts about 2 more on me. She gently touches my arm and leaves my room. The next morning, I was surprised to see my mom in the kitchen. I asked her if she woke up in the middle of the night, and she reassured me she didn't. I still have no idea what or who put the blankets on me. Earlier this year, I went to a nearby restaurant to get some food. The restaurant was about 10 minutes away. I ordered my food and grabbed it. When I was heading back to my house, I had to pass through this overgrown tree that has leaves that are 2 meters above the ground. When I was passing through it, there was this little creature that popped up in front of me. It was fully yellow and looked like it was hovering on 2 legs. I know what you guys might be thinking, it was a moth or other insect. It was not, because this thing had tiny arms, human-like legs, a human-like nose, eyes, ears, and wings. The creature then flew away as soon as it saw me, and it was very quick. I even looked up if there were any insect species in my area that matched the description of what I saw, but nothing came up. That is what I experienced a few months ago. Could anyone help me find out what it was? I lived with my wife in a small village in France, my wife's nation of origin. We lived in a tiny room on a farm that dates back to the 1400s. We had no hot water or indoor bathroom there, and no television. This was around the time of Chernobyl. We spent much of our time walking through the woods, looking for chestnuts, berries, and edible mushrooms. There was a small meadow surrounded by pine woods just a short distance from the village where we would go to pick some mushrooms that my wife was fond of. That is what we were doing on this particular day. I was nosing around the edge of the woods while she was filling her basket. I saw a ruin a short way into the trees, a sort of tower. I went to check it out. At some point, I looked up to see some huge stone blocks above me that looked like they could come down at any moment. I would have been flattened. I quickly left that spot and went to rejoin my wife. By the time I reached her, I was growing very uneasy. My wife was feeling the same thing. It was quiet, calm, and peaceful. We saw nothing at all, nor did we hear anything out of the ordinary, but we both sensed this heavy presence in our midst. Something was not happy with the two of us being there. It was unmistakable, and we both sensed it at the same time before we were back together. My wife speculated that there might have been a sanglier, a wild boar, somewhere nearby. This is a fine and sensible conclusion. They are large and dangerous animals. I don't think this was an animal, though. I've always felt that I had gotten someone's attention while investigating the ruin and that it followed me out of there. In any case, we left immediately. Once we were back on the path to the village, the feeling of that brooding presence left us. I don't know what it was. Speculation is pointless. But, as I said, I don't think it was an animal. Whatever it was, I hope never to meet it again. I'm not sure what exactly I saw last night, but it terrified me. My boyfriend and I walked into our bedroom last night to get ready for bed. He walked out to the kitchen to grab something to snack on and left the door wide open. Seconds later, I saw a humanoid being walked past my door. It seemed to be in the form of a woman, except its whole being was entirely black, and it was wearing a long nightgown. It didn't have a face, it was just pitch black, yet I knew it was staring directly at me. As I realized what I was looking at, I pressed my face into my palms and started to pray. As I was praying, I felt a very weird vibrating sensation. Luckily, after a few minutes, my boyfriend walked back into the room, and I explained what I just saw. I'm not sure what this being is or where it came from, despite its intentions. I lived in Columbia, South Carolina, and frequented CNP, so I'm familiar with the area. I would often jump the fence and walk the boardwalk at night, as it's super peaceful to walk the swamp and hear all the wildlife. They never have a ranger or guard there after hours, so I was always alone. The last time I did this was in October 21, when I was taking my usual stroll with a flashlight in hand. I should mention that between the insects and frogs, the sound is loud. But then it completely stopped when I was about a mile in. I heard what I thought was my wife calling me from the trail ahead, but she wasn't there. I was alone, and she was out of town. I then heard water sloshing to my right and saw nothing with my flashlight. I chalked it up to being tired and kept moving. The wildlife started up shortly after, and everything was fine. Maybe 15 minutes later, I noticed it got eerily quiet again and heard swamp water sloshing on my left, but this time it was more deliberate, like somebody walking. I was in a thick portion of the cypress and couldn't see more than 20 feet in front of me, and then I heard my wife's voice again. Again, she wasn't with me and was out of town, certainly not moving through a swamp. At 1 a.m. I saw what looked like a human silhouette move between the trees for a split second, but it was off. Very skinny, pale, and taller than me at 6 feet. I noped the duck out of there and ran the almost 2 miles back to my truck, and I didn't slow down until I heard the wildlife again. Like I said, this is a boardwalk that's in a swamp in the boonies. Nobody is walking around in the water at night without a light, or ever, and I don't know of any animal that big that walks in a bipedal pattern, and I have spent my life in the outdoors. I feel I should add that I wasn't high or sleep deprived, I just like the woods at night. I was so freaked out by this that I'm convinced I encountered a crawler, a wendigo, or something else that can mimic voices. There's no way some meth head was stumbling through the swamp miles from civilization. That sounds like wifey, but then again, it is also South Carolina. Just today, my friend and I were hiking on some abandoned and unused land. It's really beautiful, with lakes, cliffs, and tons of trees. The hike was going really well, but when it got close to dark, it turned around. My friend whispered to me that they had been thinking of skinwalkers and couldn't stop. This got me thinking of the same, and we decided to head back to the car to eliminate any risk. A few minutes into the hike back, we both got horrible feelings, and it became apparent that we were not alone. We kept making our way back to the car as fast as we could, but it kept getting worse. Both of us experienced blurred vision, and the air suddenly got thick and had a hum to it. It also became incredibly hard to move, and we both experienced an intense urge to lay down and stop hiking. We came across an area we hadn't yet hiked through, but it was adjacent to where we were, and there were so many deer prints in every direction, as if a deer had been rapidly pacing there, and human footprints on the other side of that scramble. There wasn't a clear starting point for the footprints, and there was no evidence of other hikers for miles. The trek back to the car seemed to take 5 minutes and 3 hours simultaneously, so we have no clue how long it took. Neither of us has felt this sense of dread or been this disoriented before. Do you think we had a close encounter with a skinwalker, or was it something else entirely? I do not have the background knowledge to say what exactly it could be. We are in eastern Kansas, if that helps. Any information or ideas are appreciated. In 2000, I was hunting small game with my mom, dad, and our 110 lab in a 200-acre public area about 1 hour north of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and just east of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. We were walking in a line from a dirt road through a field of waist-high grass, about 40 acres, to the edge of a very wet marsh. I was on the left side with the dog, my dad in the middle, and mom on the right edge. My parents were about halfway in, and I was just ahead of them, about 15 feet, when I heard a growling, snarling, grunting, panting, and heavy breathing noise coming from behind me between me and my dad. In waist-high, thick, wild grass, I could see the top half of this creature moving as fast as someone running a full sprint on a track. At first, I thought it was a black bear, but only a few have been sighted in this half of the state in the last 50 years. This creature was longer and more slender than a bear, it had defined muscles. It looked like a 7-foot tall, muscular man on all fours, with black body hair, 4 to 6 inches in length, covering his whole body. The face did not have a snout, it had hands and human feet, it looked close to a human with eyes like a human. It smelled like a very wet dog. It ran very fast and covered the 40-acre field in seconds. Each stride was at least 6 feet apart, through thick, waist-high grass. It looked at me, snarled at me, and growled as it passed within feet of me. It disappeared into the marsh, and we left. My sighting took place 7 years ago. To this day, I can't explain or find anyone else who has seen a similar creature. One fall night, I was invited to my friend's place in my hometown for a get-together before he moved away to another province, Canadian. The night consisted of playing pool, poker, and talking about the good old days with a few other buddies. Before I knew it, the clock read 4:45 a.m., and I had to head back to my home city, which was 45 minutes away, to pick up my girlfriend from work at 6 a.m. I said my goodbyes, jumped in my truck, and began my journey home. To get home, there is a town exactly halfway between my hometown and the city I reside in. In between the two small towns, there is a forest, which is a good 10-minute drive to get through. As I entered the forest, I almost hit a deer and decided to slow down and take my time to be safe, as I had lots of time to get home. As I approached the exit of the forest, there was a left curve in the road and an adjacent dirt road with a white wooden fence lining it, going up a hill to what I would imagine would lead to someone's property or home. As I was making the turn, I saw something in my headlights, the brights, at the edge of the fence. It was a tall, pale, milky white creature with a bald head. Its eyes reflected back. Clothes less. Its arms and legs are just as white as its bald head. I saw it for a second or two as it made a move to dive behind the fence. I braked, backed up slowly, and pointed my lights at the fence, looking for any kind of movement. I was parked on the highway, which was abandoned at 5 a.m. My heart was racing, and I didn't know why. I must have sat there for a minute before I calmed down, didn't see any movement, and decided I better not go and investigate, or maybe I'd become a missing person, and continued my journey home. I talked to my girlfriend about it when I picked her up. Her first question was, "Why didn't you go see what it was?" Lol. To this day, I still wouldn't have gotten out to investigate unless I had a weapon or someone with me. So the only description I have of this thing is that it is tall, pale, bald, and has human-like features but no noticeable hair or eyebrows. So if anyone has had a similar experience with this thing or things, I would be happy to hear about it and be glad I'm not crazy and the only one. My father told me of an event of this type that happened to him when he was around elementary school age, in the late 50s or early 60s. He said he was at home by himself one night when, all of a sudden, he looked up to a window that was far above ground level. He described seeing an upside-down face slowly merging down from the top side of the window. The strange thing was that he claimed it was a wolf face that was staring at him and not a human face. Now, I suppose it could have been teenagers or someone playing a mean trick on my defenseless young father, but the weirdest part of the story to me is that the face came into the window frame upside down and from a height that would not be too easy for a human to get to. Thoughts? This happened about 6 years ago, when I was 13 years old. I visited my best friend, who lived a 2-hour car drive away from me, for about 2 weeks. The first night there, we went to bed at around 4 a.m. We placed a mattress beside her bed for me to sleep on. Her bed was fairly high. When I slept on my left side, I could look completely under her bed and had to actually stand up to see her. We fell asleep pretty quickly, but about an hour later, I just woke up. I realized that I wasn't going to fall asleep soon, so I started looking through the room without thinking about anything when I saw something standing in front of my mattress. I was scared shitless and immediately hid under my blanket to analyze the situation. I knew that it wasn't human, it was just a pitch black shadow standing there. I couldn't see a face or anything. The silhouette did look human, though. I also didn't see it move. It just stood there. Out of curiosity, I wanted to look again because it could have been a normal shadow after all. As expected, the shadow was still there, but there was no logical explanation for it. Nothing in the room could have cast a shadow to look like that, and the room was a complete darkness anyway, so I couldn't see any other clear shadows except that one. I didn't want to wake my friend up because I was too scared to move again or to make any noises. Not knowing what to do, I was just lying on my left side, trying not to freak out, while that thing just stood there. This was maybe 5 years ago, and to this day, it gives me the creeps. I was with my buddy on our way to a friend's house to catch a UFC fight. We had stopped at the store for a case of beer, and on the way to my friend's house, we missed the turn. Luckily, in that neighborhood, all of the streets are sort of connected. So instead of doing a U-turn, I just told my buddy, just catch the next turn and do a full circle so we can turn around like that. Streets are pretty narrow since it's a residential area and we were in a pickup truck with 24-inch rims. Well, he starts slowing down, and I'm looking at a scratch to see if I won. When my buddy goes, "Look, someone's husky is just sitting in the middle of the road," I look up, and I'm like, "Nah, man, that's way too big to be a husky," so I told him to switch to his high beams. As soon as he did whatever it was, he did not like it. So, like I said, my friend's truck is sitting on big wheels, and this thing still looked huge, and it was maybe less than 10 feet away from us. When the light hit it, it turned its head, and when I say we saw a human face on this thing, I mean we could make out our eyes, nose, and mouth. Everything. Then it literally just spread these big-ass wings and took flight. There was no noise from the wings. We literally had to pull over to the side of the road to kind of just evaluate what the hell we saw. I went to my friend's house and told them what we just saw, but they didn't take us seriously. I still don't know what we saw that night. So, for context, it was pretty late at night, but I don't remember the exact time. It was around 12 to 2 a.m. but I was with my boyfriend in the car. We were just sitting and talking before he went home. But as we were talking, I was sitting in the passenger seat, so my body was directed towards him and the road I used to live on. We are in mid-conversation when I see a figure walk past on the other side of the road, going towards a park I lived near, just right around the corner of that road. This figure was pretty tall. Not inhumanly tall, but definitely taller than the average person. And it was completely all white, not glowing, but a super bright white that I could see perfectly, even with it being dark. It looked as if it had no clothes on, but honestly, it didn't need them. I didn't see any details on the body or body parts, like a butt or any muscle definition. The limbs were thick in the sense that they just looked like cylinders, but they weren't thicker than the body itself. The neck wasn't inhumanly skinny, but definitely thinner than I'd think a normal person has. The head was rather small, but again, not inhumanely small. Just oddly proportioned for the height of this thing. The whole time, I was speechless. It wasn't a small glance, I stared at this figure walking for a solid minute or so. My boyfriend didn't realize it since we were mid-conversation until he realized the look I had on my face, and by then, it had turned the corner. He didn't see it at all since his body was directed towards me. And I went to a family member about it who lived with me at the time and had a story of her own about weird paranormal experiences at the park I was walking to. Hers was a bit different. It was the same with plain white figures, but instead it was more than one, and their heads were spinning. She and her friends ran home immediately after noticing. If any of this sounds familiar to another story, a creature/humanoid description, etc., please let me know. I've been thinking about this for some months before just caving in and asking for help, since searching the description I gave got me nowhere and looks nothing like what came up. This event happened a couple of months before I moved to a new house. I lived there with my roommate, and I've never had such activity happen prior to this. To get straight to the point, I got ready for bed, closed my bedroom door, and got on my bed. My cat was meowing outside of my room. I always keep my cat out of my bedroom during the night, since I can't sleep when he's in there. Suddenly, I hear a very loud slam come from outside or on my bedroom door. I quickly turn on my flashlight on my phone and point it towards where the sound came from. My cat was now in my bedroom, looking around, completely freaked out. He avoided eye contact and was walking extremely slowly. The door behind him was closed. How can a cat open a door and close it in the span of 3 seconds? He's never done that before. Not to mention the loud slam. It was way too loud for the cat to have caused. I quickly got up and went into my roommate's room, which is only a few inches away from my room. She was awake. I asked her if she heard the loud slam, which she was visibly confused at, and she responded, "No." Why? This added to my confusion, as, for comparison, when we're in our bedrooms, we can very clearly hear sounds coming from the living room. So how is it that she didn't hear the very loud slam that was only 2 inches away from her room's door? I went back to my room and slightly pulled my door open, leaving it a couple of inches open. When I went back to bed, I could have sworn I saw a figure outside of my door staring right at me. I got chills. I don't have schizophrenia, and I've never had hallucinatory experiences in my life. Anyone know what this could have been? This is an experience I keep having that I wanted to share and possibly get advice on. A few weeks ago, my partner and I moved into a new luxury apartment with our 2 cats. We live in a major city near the beach. The apartment building was recently renovated but has had previous tenants, and the land has also been in use for hundreds of years for various purposes. We are on the 6th floor. The only thing I've found in the apartment that belonged to prior tenants were folic acid supplements in the cabinet. Since the very first night we lived here, I've been having a strange experience with an entity. I have had some odd stuff happen before, but nothing quite like this. The first night, I was still awake at about 2 in the morning and got up to go to the bathroom. Clear as day, I heard a deep, male voice say, "There you are." At first, I thought our home was being invaded, that's how human-like and clear the voice was. But then I saw a shadowy entity in the hallway. It was very tall, vaguely humanoid, and dark, sort of like a shadow, but almost static pixelated. It seemed to be walking on the ground. I retreated back to the bedroom and got in bed. I saw the entity briefly enter the bedroom. Without opening the door, it just went through the wall, and then go back to the hallway. I thought I might have had a waking dream or something. I told my partner about it the next morning, but we both shrugged it off. What's weird is that we were working from home the next day, and I saw it again. Standing in the hallway, still appearing shadowy, but this time in broad daylight. One of my cats who was next to me sat up and looked directly at it, which is what made me turn around to see it. Another cat walked around it the same way it would walk around a human person. Around 2 to 3 a.m. every night, the entity walks the same pathway down the hallway, into the bedroom, then back through the hallway. During midday, it just sits in the hallway for 15 minutes or so before disappearing again. It doesn't appear every day, but it does appear every night. Sometimes it speaks. It once asked, "Where are you going?" when I turned around to go back to bed. It will otherwise not interact with me. It has never approached me or left the hallway or bedroom entry. My partner can't see it. The cats continue to interact with it, look at it, meow at it, etc. I performed a cleanse with sage and then with holy water my parents gave me, and I've had no luck. It's not a scary entity, per se, but I do find it very unsettling, and I've been struggling to sleep or relax. Let me know if you guys have any thoughts. Most nights than not, I will drive down to New Cumberland for a cold beer and some darts, and one night in October 2012 was no different. On the return trip, not long after midnight, I was on Route 382 headed east towards Lewisberry. As I was approaching John Brenneman's place up on the right, Just before Brenneman Drive, I saw someone walking towards me along the side of the road. True, it was late, but it was rather mild for October, so it wasn't out of the question that someone might be walking along the road. What was odd is that he was quite tall, 6 feet 6 inches or taller, and really, really thin. In the few seconds I was looking at him, I noticed that he seemed to be dressed all in black, with black pants, a tight black trench coat, very, very dark skin, and short dark hair. He was either limping or having trouble walking. As I debated slowing down, maybe someone had had an accident, he dropped down to all fours and quickly scampered across the road in front of me. He has a face that is, as I said, coal black with a cross between human and canine faces. And then he was gone. When I got home, I hadn't really thought much about it, but over the next day or two, it really started to give me the creeps. I didn't say anything to anyone for a few days, then told a few close friends. Being self-employed and fearing derision, I was reticent to make much ado about it. Although I have on either side of the car, when we came into this weird little clearing, there was this random shack with a deer painted on it and a bright light attached to the building above it. We laughed at how randomly or oddly they decided to shut the car off and chat for a while. My ex turned the headlights off, and we are just sitting there, thinking about getting out and looking at the stars. All of a sudden, everything goes insanely still, but it was like an explosion of noise in my head while my ears went deaf. I'm not sure how to explain it. I sat straight up, like someone had shoved a rod of ice down my spine. All of the hair on my body stood up. I got increasingly nauseous, and all I could do was stare ahead. I was vaguely aware my ex was still talking, but it was like in slow motion and sounded weird when all of a sudden I just burst out and said, "We need to leave. We can't be here. Something bad is coming." My ex thought I was ducking with him until I burst into tears. I couldn't even turn to look at him, all I could do was stare straight ahead and say we needed to leave over and over. Finally, I couldn't even hear him, I couldn't speak. Ahead of us, right out of the tree line, came this creature. And it was huge. It was probably 7 or 8 feet tall. It was like a shadow. It had super long arms and legs, its knees were inverted and pointing backwards. It had a long torso and a human skull-shaped head. It was just walking around like whatever, tralala. It moved its head to the side and had this long. I have no idea what was hanging off the back of its head. Like one of those old nightcaps you see in old drawings. Anyway, it walks into the moonlight almost instantly, and I realize it's not even solid, it's like super dark static, but holy shit, I have no words to describe the terror I felt in those few moments watching this thing. So it's looking around, and then all of a sudden it's like it can sense that I can see it, and everything is so wrong. It stops, and it looks right ducking at me. I just knew it could see me looking at it. It started slowly making its way down the path towards us, and I have never felt such hatred and loathing coming off something. I was terrified as duck. All of a sudden, it was like I came to, and I started screeching for my ex to turn on the lights. Turn on the ducking lights. He said he couldn't see anything, and what was I freaking out about when I finally was able to break free of my frozen stance and I launched my body over and turned the headlights whilst keeping my eyes on this thing. As soon as the lights came on, they disappeared. I made my ex turn around and get out of there, and I slept with the lights on for weeks. I was in the army, and any time we had to go do field exercises at night, I was terrified. I never saw it again, but duck that. Never going back into the Georgia woods like that. When I was around 8 or 9, I lived in a large house that was built brand new. In fact, my family paid for the lot that the house was then built on. It was a suburban neighborhood. It was tucked between some mountains on a large hill. Growing up, I had more than my fair share of odd encounters at this house. Looking back now, I often wonder if the land we were on had some sort of history. It's worth mentioning where I live, Native American artifacts have been discovered throughout the area. One night, I had an uneasy feeling of being alone in my room. I then opted to sleep in my parents' room that night, so as I made my way out of my room, I had to make a sharp right down the hall to get to their room. As I turned the corner, I immediately saw a tall, blindingly bright figure standing in the middle of the hallway. It was so incredibly bright, it was hard to look at, not that I wanted to. But the weird thing about it was that it didn't emit light, it just was light. I'm unsure if that makes sense to most, but I guess the way I would best describe it was a 5 feet plus figure of light that did not illuminate the hall but was just impossibly bright on its own. Fear kicked in immediately, and I instinctively buried my face in my arms and followed the wall past it. I was too scared to do anything else. To this day, I have not seen anything like this. I've tried to rationalize it for a long time but have come up with little explanation. You know when you're in a bright room and then once it goes dark, you see those bright flashes for a second while your eyes adjust? I thought it may be that, but it doesn't make much sense for that to be the reason, as my bedroom was fairly dark, with the exception of a small nightlight in the wall. It doesn't seem like a drastic enough change in light to see spots. Also, this didn't occur right as I left my room into the dark hallway, but when I was walking down the hall and made a turn, I don't know, I've never looked much into it but might do some research. When my father was a kid, he was around 10 or 11. He was in bed, trying to sleep. It was very quiet. The only light in the room was shining in from a window across his bed. Then his door swayed open. Thinking it was his cat, he turned to the door and called for his cat. But from the shining of the light and the way this humanoid crawled, it was unsettling. It was on 4 legs. But it was not a cat. He froze and sank deep into his bed. My dad is frozen with fear. Think about it, you're 10, and a crawling man reaches out of the dark and starts its slow stride towards you. The more it grew closer, the more the light of the moon lit up its green skin. The man was now inches away from the father's face. He told me he screamed without sound. Nothing but a wheeze came out of his mouth. And he told me that he was so scared of death or whatever this was that he went completely blind, or was so scared that his brain overloaded and he didn't memorize. But the man went back to wherever he came from. Needless to say, my father never slept that night and is still scared of this man. And it turns out the green man is a common theme in our family. An ancestor of mine, named the same as my father, wrote a poem about the green man. I believe he was alive sometime in the mid-1800s. I don't have the poem, my father took it when he moved away to another state, but I do remember bits of it. It was about him struggling to find muses to write his next story. Then he sees this man in the tree line outside his window. He was green. The man was more peaceful than my father's experience with him. I was just standing there, looking back at my super great grandfather. Which marks the width of a piece of bubble gum, and then we hear someone say, "Hello? Guys?" And at this time of night during camp, nobody at all is outside, everyone is in their cabins. So we are all shitting ourselves like who the duck just said that, but whispering extremely quietly about me, and then a roughly 8-9 foot tall humanoid man with horns and glowing eyes walks right in the door and stands there for 3 hours and just stares directly at me while I pretend to sleep, scared out of my wits, and then I fell asleep the next morning. There was nobody there. I have been paranoid ever since. When I was in high school, me and some friends would go explore this half-built house that was across a field from our buddy's place. The house had been there, abandoned, for years, so we felt pretty comfortable exploring it. My friend lived out in the country, so we never had to worry about anyone being in the house or catching us there. Most of the time, everything went fine, and we would do normal kid stuff like climb in the rafters or play games around the house when it was late and we wanted to do something outside. One night, my friends and I decided to go to this house for another innocent yet fun reason. There were no drugs or alcohol involved, we just wanted to go exploring. We loaded into an SUV, and as we drove across the field, we all got quiet. When we pulled up, we sat there in the car in silence, looking at the side of the house. Nobody moved, nobody said anything. We all had this gut-wrenching feeling that something wasn't right. One person mentioned it, and we all agreed that this was weird. We had been there plenty of times at night and never had this feeling of something isn't right, we shouldn't be here until now. Being our genius selves, we get out of the car and walk in. This feeling of fear gets stronger the closer we get. Inside the house, we were all overwhelmed with this desire to just get out. My fight or flight senses started kicking in. I was terrified, on edge, dreading every other second I had to spend there. There was this hole in the ground where they had an opening to the basement. We all stared at this opening and knew that there was something down there in the darkness. Nobody was going to check it out. After staring into the black pit of terror for a solid minute, we all decided to get as far from that house as we could. We went back the next day and checked it out in the light, and everything seemed fine. The basement was empty apart from a weirdly small cot, and overall, nothing was out of the ordinary. To this day, my friends will talk about that night like it was a nightmare. We all agree that there was something in the house. Whatever it was, it had to be some kind of dark, demonic thing. Something was telling us it wasn't safe from the moment we arrived. I've never felt anything quite as strong or terrifying as what I felt in that house. Whatever was in that basement wasn't human, and it wasn't there for good reasons. When I was about 10, I was camping with my family at a place called Haynes Island on the Alabama River. It is a dense, swampy area that is secluded and floods easily, so most people who camp at the river choose one of the more populated RV campgrounds. That isn't my dad's style, though. When we camped, it was old school, rough it out camping. Anyways, I was about 10, and I was at the little playground area at the campground, swinging and singing songs or whatever. It hadn't been dark when I came over to the playground, but nighttime had taken over without my paying much attention, and it was pretty dark. The playground opened to the camp trail on one side and was surrounded by wooded areas on 3 sides. Through the trees in front of the swing set was a bathroom/shower facility for campers. I'm swinging, and all of a sudden I hear rustling coming from the bushes in front of me. I stopped swinging and got quiet. I could see the bathroom facility's lights through the brush and the trees, but I didn't see anything moving in the bushes. I have an older sister and an older brother. I was 100% sure it was my brother hiding in the bushes, trying to scare me. Because I was so sure it was him, I walked straight to where I'd heard the noise come from to let him know his plan was foiled. So I find myself at the edge of the woods, surrounded by these bushes, which are unkempt and completely swallow me. I say out loud to my brother that I know he's trying to scare me, and he can go suck an egg. There's no answer, and it is completely still and weirdly quiet. I mean, weirdly quiet. If he was just here trying to scare me, where did he go, and why didn't I see any sign of him at all? All the hair stood up to my neck, and I froze. A voice, a raspy whisper, says my name right in my ear. I mean, I could feel this voice. It was like someone twice my height was hunched over behind me, way too close to my ear, almost touching me but not quite. Except there was no one there. No one. I lit out of there like nobody's business and sprinted back to the campsite. Everyone was accounted for, including my brother, and I must have looked the way I was feeling because they immediately asked me what happened. I know a ghost whispered in my ear. This is a cliché spooky story, but I swear on a stack of Bibles this happened. Up until the age of 5, I saw ghosts all the time because I didn't know about death. I used to be scared shitless of this lady named Debbie, who attached herself to me when I was 3. She would follow me no matter where I went and show up at random times, causing multiple meltdowns of screaming and crying for me because she was so scary looking. Half of her face, from her left cheek to her mouth and her nose, was burned. Like there was smoke still coming off of her, some spots were still barely burning, think like embers in a dying campfire, parts of her skin were peeling off, and she smelled like a mixture of burnt toast and rotting meat. My mom thought I was mentally ill until the landlord of the house Debbie came from showed up to collect rent during one of my meltdowns, where I was screaming at Debbie to go away. Apparently, according to the landlord, there was a fire in one of the bedrooms that killed a woman named Deborah back in the 1950s. Very shortly after we moved, Debbie followed me no matter where we moved for a whole year, until my mom told her she was dead. Come to think about it, all Debbie wanted to do was play with me. I remember that's what she always wanted to do, play with me and my toys. She was so sad, and she wasn't evil or anything. She was just so freaking terrifying to look at, especially for a 3-year-old, that I freaked out every time I saw her. Though she did attach herself to me, which was not cool at all. I saw plenty of ghosts as a kid, including drowned children, a man who died of a heart attack, long gone farmhands working in a field, and a house that had burned down long before I was born. I woke up to a demonic voice talking directly into my ear. I was lying on my side, asleep, and it was as if someone was leaning over my bed talking to me. It jolted me out of an otherwise normal dream. It was speaking clearly, low but not whispering, and kind of urgent, like it was trying to relay some important information. But in some languages, I couldn't identify. I had a very distinct sense that this was not and had never been human. Which is why I call it demonic, because I don't know what the hell else to call it. It continued for several seconds after my eyes opened, long enough for me to register the time, 2:30 a.m. exactly. I was facing my alarm clock, and I didn't feel paralyzed, but I didn't try to move until a few minutes after it stopped. Unsurprisingly, I did not make it back to sleep that night. Probably some form of sleep paralysis or lucid dream, but damn if that didn't give me the willies. It's only happened once, 5 years ago, and never again. I wish I knew what it was trying to tell me. My family moved from upstate New York, to a small town near Bradenton, Florida. I moved with them. Their house is in a wildernessy neighborhood that hasn't existed there for long. Native Americans used to occupy the land, from what we've heard. My room had a huge sliding glass window with no screens and was the only one in the house to directly face the woods out back. Right when we moved in, I felt uneasy about being near the window, looking into the woods, or having my blinds open. A few weeks after moving in, I started having what I think are night terrors. I would wake up screaming and think something was in my room trying to get me. I've never had this happen, even as a child. It was scary and unnerving for both me and my sleeping partner. I started hearing knocking on my window at night. At first, I thought I was hearing things, but then I started getting really freaked out. I always ignored it and never went up to the window, looked outside, or opened it. My partner never heard this, he was always asleep and brushed me off when I told him. I just adamantly kept my window locked from there on out. Then I started hearing my neighbor or friend next door knocking on my window at night, whispering my name, and asking me if I'm up and if I want to come out and smoke with her. I answered this by saying a sleepy no and going back to sleep. I asked her about this, and she said she was never doing that, and I was just getting increasingly freaked out. I started feeling very alone and powerless and wondered if I was going crazy. One night, I put a lucky protective crystal on my windowsill for protection. Side note, don't judge me for this, I didn't know if this was happening in my head or not. I didn't know what to do for protection. Anyway, I woke up, and the crystal was in the same spot, broken in half, and looked like lightning or something struck it. I saw black figures in my room a couple of times. Nothing ever happened, I would only see them and they would be gone, and it was always at night when I was barely awake. I figured there were spirits in the home, so I did a couple of things to help mitigate that, like using salt, burning cedarwood, and spraying holy water on the walls. Our back porch was screened in and a nice place to sit outside. I meditated a couple of times out there and heard all the wildlife and creatures outside. The noises would stop, and it would just be silent, dead air. I would listen for anything and just hear nothing aside from creepy snapping branch sounds. I would run inside after that. We had bobcats, raccoons, alligators, and wild boars, so I figured it was an animal. Luckily, I moved back to upstate New York for personal and career reasons. So obviously, nothing else really happened for me. I visited my family around Halloween time, about a year after moving. My sister and I stayed up late watching Pet Sematary and started talking about creepy stuff. She turns to me and says, "Did Dad tell you he thought he saw some kind of Slender Man thing in the woods?" I immediately got freaked out and slept horribly that night. I asked my dad the next day what he saw, and he said it was a very tall creature, about 9 feet, he guessed, extremely skinny, that almost looked like a black tree, moving abnormally fast and smoothly through the woods in broad daylight. He did just have laser eye surgery a few weeks before, so he thought possibly it was his eyes ducking up or him misinterpreting something. I dislike sleeping at my parents' house when I visit Florida now. I've experienced a non-human entity at least twice in my life that I know of, and I believe it to have been the same entity following me around during a very hard time in my early teenage years. It looked like a pillar of bright white light, totally translucent and without any discernible features, but it definitely felt sentient. The first time I saw it, it was floating about 10 feet in the air over a campfire. The second time, it was hovering outside the second floor window of my then best friend's bedroom. The second time, my friend's 4-year-old brother, who hadn't been anywhere near us all day, later asked if we'd seen the angel outside on the porch. It was very unsettling at the time, but now I see it as harmless, potentially even protective. Every year, my friends and I go on a week-long canoe trip in Algonquin Park, usually to drink and fish. This past summer, we decided to stay on Tom Thompson Lake, if you know it, for our main site, which ended up being on an island in the middle of the lake. There were 6 of us in total, with one group of 4 in a large tent, one guy in a solo tent, and myself in a hammock between them. One night, we had been huddled around the fire at about 1 a.m. when we noticed a flare in the sky over what we assumed was an adjacent lake. We didn't think much of it until an awful scream came across the lake about 20 minutes later. I was the only one left sober at this time, and there wasn't much we could do, so we assumed it was the problem bear in the area we'd been warned of at the outfitters. The strange part came after everyone had gone to bed. At 4 a.m., the other 5 guys went to their tents and passed out while I lay in my hammock, listening to them fall asleep. For reference, the group of 4 was about 30 feet to my right, and the other guy was about 100 feet to my left on the far shore. As I watched the stars and tried to will myself to sleep, I noticed everything had gone incredibly silent. Suddenly feeling creeped out, I slowed my breathing and stayed as still as I could, thinking about the possible bear and how I was a neatly wrapped meat sack hanging there. Then, I heard a voice call out about 20 feet to my left, by the remains of our fire. It was the voice of my friend Seamus, who was one of the guys passed out in the large tent. 4 hellos, with each one sounding more emotionless. Hello? 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 All said within maybe 6 seconds. Although I immediately recognized his voice, every instinct I had was on alert, telling me not to respond. I stayed as quiet as a corpse for the next 5 minutes, listening for any movement, until I felt the tension leave the air. It disturbed me a lot to know how normally you can hear every movement on the site, and yet I heard absolutely nothing. The next morning, everyone told me they'd heard nothing, but we agreed to move sites early since we'd all gotten an eerie vibe from that night. This was our 6th trip to Algonquin, and we've never had any creepy experiences before. I hope that what I heard that night was a camper, with an identical voice to my friend, who had come to see if the site was free or Seamus had somehow stealthily sleptwalk out of his tent, but neither seems possible. I 100% would have heard them moving. Anyway, I can only hope nothing happens on future trips, but it will be hard to forget the fear of this event. This happened about 14 years ago. Back then, I was really into paranormal movies and shows. I would go to graveyards at night with a friend and take video, hoping to capture something. Nothing ever came of it other than being creeped out of the utter quiet and darkness that is a cemetery at night. One night I woke up in bed from a dead sleep, paralyzed with a cold, numbing fear. I couldn't move. I shouldn't move because something in the room was watching me. I could feel it at the foot of the bed, near the closet. The childish instinct to hide in the blankets was so strong, but I just knew I could not move. It's hard to describe the type of fear I had. It was a fear created by knowing something terrible and evil was in the room waiting for me. It was something foreign, dangerous, and nothing I've ever known before. For an estimated 30 minutes, I lay there without moving. I didn't turn my head. I didn't look around. I breathed. I waited while telling myself that, rationally, there was nothing there. There were other people in the house. The tree outside my window was rustling from the breeze. I could hear the familiar creaks of the apartment settling. Everything around me was normal except for that direction by my closet at the foot of the bed. I bargained with myself and argued internally that there was nothing there. I reasoned that it would be okay to move. I made a plan. I would roll slowly to my side, out of bed, and into the computer chair. I would turn on the computer and immediately immerse myself in the familiar world of the internet. I planned to visit my regular website haunts and open a chat with any available friend. It took another 10 minutes of planning to pull myself into action. Everything went smoothly. I got up, climbed into my computer chair like it was a buoy at sea, and flipped the monitor on. I did not look at the closet. The screen drowned out the darkness of the room. I found a friend online and immediately messaged them about my plight. As we chatted, I began to feel my muscles relax. The overbearing evil thing started to fade as my attention was drawn to funny pictures and humor while my friend and I created jokes about the situation. An hour after I awoke from a dead sleep into a nightmare, I was brave enough to get a glass of water. I never looked at the closet until dawn came in through the window to brighten the room. There was nothing there. To this day, I don't know what it was. Since that day, I have never gone to a graveyard seeking ghosts again, and I've never experienced anything else like it. I'll also never forget it, though, as it remains one of the most terrifying moments of my life. This happened 2 times one summer, about 15 years ago, with different people a month apart. The first time, I was camping in the woods with my friend and her family. After dinner one night, her uncle started telling us about paranormal experiences he had in his home country. My friend has roots in Southeast Asia. They were creepy tales, and being a lover of horror movies, I was thrilled, to say the least. After story time, my friend's cousins and I, a total of 3, went out ghost hunting. The campground was one of those that had dirt roads, and in between them were trees and sites for tents and whatnot. We started walking past where people were camped and ended up at the edge, where it was just a dark forest. Before we got there, the younger cousin fled back to the campsite due to fear. Me and the remaining cousin laughed as we were both brave, or stupid, teenagers. Anyways, we're walking down the road looking into the darkness when, all of a sudden, I see this white humanoid thing. And by white, I mean like stark white. I described it as fluorescent, which isn't entirely accurate as it didn't give off light but was bright enough to see in the dark. It is safe to say it was spooky. I asked the cousin to shine the light on the thing, but he said he was frozen in fear. Shortly after, we bolted back to the camp. Now, at this point, I could have chalked it up to our minds playing tricks on us after literally going ghost hunting because we were told ghost stories, which I did for a while. Until the next time I see it. The second time was back in my town, which is about 90 miles away and in the middle of suburbia. This time I was out with 2 friends, and we were driving around doing dumb teenager shit. We ended up parking at one of the parks in our town. This park is massive. It has a bunch of sports fields, hills, a giant playground, a lake, and even an outdoor amphitheater with big grass steps for seating. We ended up at the top of these grass steps, and were staring at the sky, enjoying the beautiful starry night. Then I looked down at the stage, which has a building attached for dressing rooms, and I see the white humanoid again peering out from behind the building. I turn to my friends and ask them if they see it too, and they both say yes. Then we go down to investigate, but find nothing behind the building or in the woods behind it. My friends may have been high on marijuana, but I was sober. I didn't try to trick them, I just asked them, and they both said yes and looked freaked out. We left after that. I haven't seen this thing since, which is okay with me. And I've tried to explain it to myself with the aforementioned doubts, mind playing tricks, hi friends, but seeing it on 2 occasions with different people is where I'm stumped. I don't know what it could have been. I had some old friends that used to group together and ghost hunt. I had never been with them on any adventure, but they invited me to go to an old school that was said to be based on a ward for the mentally ill. It had been closed for years, and an older member of our group claimed that he went there for a few elementary grades until it shut down. So here we are, sneaking into a dilapidated school. Boards over broken windows, bad flooring, all that good stuff. I was carrying a 6-pack of high-test beer, with a few in me, before we got there. We jumped over a gap in the floor outside one of the class buildings, and my poor 6-pack in 2 plastic bags busted with a few casualties. Fortunately, I only lost 2, so I left the bag and broken bottles there. I didn't want to, but there was no real way to keep carrying glass shards in a plastic bag while moving around closed property. We came into a hallway with several classrooms on each side. As we passed by the second set of rooms, my friend Ben stopped and asked us to look at his breath. It was coming out of his mouth like a cold winter morning, but it was August. That was good enough for the entire group, so we walked into that classroom and busted out the custom-made Ouija board. As we all sat down in the closest example of a circle we could, and Ben lit a candle while we pointed our flashlights bottom down to make some light, we all touched hands to the planchette. Ben asked, "Spirit, can you hear us?" In a voice monotonous enough to put you to sleep. "Spirit, how can you speak to us?" "Spirit, can you tell me about the Dyad?" I ask Ben if I can take a turn. I ask, "What do y'all know about Michael?" I get gibberish. I ask, "What do you know about the Nephilim?" All I get is bad vibes, and the candle goes out. It's dim as all get out, and I grab the flashlight and put it up to the ceiling as fast as I can. 4 men are freaking out, and as we get closer to the light, every person's breath is misting. August, mind you. We got out of there as safely and confidently as we could, but that feeling of a large amount of presence still makes me wonder about experiences like mine. 10 or so years ago, I was driving with my brother in Virginia Beach, Virginia. It was late at night, and we were going to grab some food. We were the only cars on this road, which wasn't abnormal due to the time of night. The right side of the road was wooded with trees, and on the left was a fence that ran parallel to the road. A giant wolf-like creature ran full speed in front of the car. It came from the right wooded area, and I was booking it towards the fence. This thing had to be at least 12 feet tall. It was hunched over, running insanely fast on its back legs. The legs were bent backward and extremely muscular. The only way I could describe it was that they were bent backwards in a way that demon legs are depicted. The legs were furless except for near the bottom, where there were patches of fur. It was wearing a brown hooded cloak that was tattered along the bottom edges. The hood covered its head and midsection, leaving the legs fully exposed. Some sort of elongated snout was emerging from the front of the hood. It was square, like a wolf's, and had fur. The thing never turned to look at us. It was running towards the fence, jumped, and cleared it. I have never seen anything jump so high. I spent the next couple of moments trying to process what I saw. I thought there was some kind of logical explanation until my brother said, "Did you see that?" and described in detail exactly what I had seen. The only thing that differed was that he saw what he described as long claws emerging from the front of the cloak. Seeing this thing terrified me. 10 years later, I am still terrified. Any ideas of what it was? When I was 12, I lived in a town called Steuben, Wisconsin. I lived in a house with my mom and my older brother at the time, who wasn't home for most of this. One night I was up late, probably about 4 a.m., when I suddenly heard what sounded like somebody standing next to me and breathing. Almost spot on the sound you'd hear if some inhaled through their nose and then exhaled from their mouth. I got up to try and pinpoint where it was coming from, and every time I thought I was coming close to it, it would move and suddenly be behind me or in another corner of the kitchen. Once I realized that, I went straight up to my room until sunrise, which was above the kitchen. When the sun came up, I went down, and my mom was awake. I went to her and told her I wanted to tell her about something, and she said she wanted to tell me about something too. So I went first and told her what I had heard, and her response was that she was about to tell me the same thing. She had been getting up early some mornings, sitting in the kitchen on the computer, and hearing this breathing sound. After that, this thing came around for a good 2 weeks or so, every night, in the middle of the night. Until one time I finally broke down and screamed at it to leave us the hell alone, and it immediately stopped and never returned after that. Another time I was laying on my bed on the phone and talking to my friend in another town when my mattress started shaking violently. It wasn't an earthquake or anything like that because it was only the mattress that shook. It felt exactly like someone had walked up to it, grabbed it, and just started shaking it like crazy. Whenever family members would visit this house, they would always think they saw someone going up our stairs. One night, I slept in our living room by myself with nothing on and distinctly heard someone whisper my name to me. A lot of other things happened while living there too, including weird stuff outside. I'm in my 30s now, and I've never been able to come up with a satisfying explanation as to what could have been making that breathing sound. Or how it was able to move around and react to me yelling at it. Anyone else have any experiences like this? Thoughts? So this happened last year. My aunt likes to travel a lot now that she's retired, and she'll ask me to take her to the airport. She lives about an hour outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in a place that's pretty rural. She doesn't like traveling out of PHL and will instead go to EWR, Newark Liberty International Airport, for those not familiar with the code or area. So last year she decided to go to South and Central America for a month and asked me to come to her house to drive her since she didn't trust my brother to actually show up when he said he would. I met her at her place the night before, went to bed for a few hours, and then we left in her car at 1 a.m. so she could get to the airport in time. We decided to take her car because it's a midsize SUV and held her luggage better than my sedan did. I guess we had been on the road for about 20 minutes. I'm not entirely sure because my perception of the passage of time isn't amazing. But we had to drive through a lot of small little old villages, not sure what else to call them. They were basically clumps of 10 houses in a small area. The homes were all super close to the road, basically right on top of it, which helped note them as being a lot older. None of the lights were on, not even candle lamps in the windows. And if you're from PA, you know what I'm talking about with those lamps. They're everywhere. The area had a lot of wood. Overall, it was just very creepy and foggy out. We were driving along, and all of a sudden we came up with something. It was facing towards a telephone pole off to the right of the car. The pole was just in front of a garage or small barn structure. All I could see was the back of its head, completely white, no hair, and its hands and its forearms, which were also totally white. It looked like it was wearing a dark shirt or something of that nature. But it was facing away from us, leaning into the telephone pole with its arms up against the pole and its head against its arms. Or at least a stance similar to that. The worst feeling I have ever felt rose up in my chest when I saw it. I felt my heart almost stop and drop into my stomach. I felt sick. And terrified. All I knew was that, whatever it was, I didn't want it to turn around. No matter what, I knew it couldn't be allowed to turn around, or I would regret it. I've seen a lot of really weird things in my life and felt a lot of really weird sensations. I've always been super sensitive to the energy in homes, and I have straight up seen ghosts in my parents' homes, one of which I am very wary of, the other, I am comforted by, but that's a different story for a different time. But this was actually terrifying. I cannot explain to you the immense feeling of dread and horror I experienced in that moment. You could only understand it if you'd experienced it yourself. We passed by it so quickly, and it was so late that I thought I must have imagined it. But that feeling stuck with me. I didn't say anything to my aunt. I thought she didn't see it either. But about 10 seconds after we went past it, she said, "Did you?" And then took a long pause. "Did you see that thing?" We talked about it. She described to me exactly what I saw. And I knew right then and there that I was going to be terrified to drive back to her home to switch cars at 4 or 5 a.m. when I got back to her place from the airport. By myself. And all I could think was that I didn't want that thing to be there. I would hit it if it came onto the road. And I wouldn't stop to check if I did. It wasn't going to get to me. Luckily, it wasn't there when I drove past the same area again on the way to her home. And believe me, I was hyper aware the entire way there. I was even terrified to walk from her front door to my car. I ran and locked myself in as soon as I sat down and shut the car door. The next time I drove her to the airport, I looked for it, but it wasn't there. I haven't seen it since. I've only told a couple friends about it, and one of them and her best friend saw something similar peeking at them around the back side of her house when they were sitting in her car one night. She also lives in rural PA, 19 miles from me, 40 minutes drive, and I'm 22-ish miles outside of Philadelphia, also roughly 40 minutes drive. She also lives out in the woods. Have any of you ever experienced something like this? My family is all of Irish descent, and I'm fairly into all the associated lore that comes with it. Last November, I was driving across a moor in southwest Scotland at night. It was pitch black, and I know for a fact that nothing is up there. It was foggy, and accordingly, I slowed down to about 45 miles per hour. Now, I know that road like the back of my hand. It's not busy usually, and I hardly saw another car the whole journey. I became aware of a noise. I could hear it over the noise of the car and over the radio that I was listening to. I slowed down a bit more and turned the music off. I could still hear it. I checked the mirrors and had a look around. I could see nothing. Getting curious, I put the windows down, which let me hear it clearer. The sound, which wasn't coming from any direction I could work out, was one of the most spine-chilling sounds I've ever heard. Imagine a sort of trumpet sound, but it's high-pitched and sounds organic. It's really hard to describe. It changed in pitch but was loud. I covered 3 to 4 miles at about 30 to 35 miles per hour listening to this, and its volume or direction didn't change. It was like it was everywhere around me, an almost mournful, keening wail. If someone told me that's what a banshee sounded like, I'd believe them. It was very disconcerting. I sped up as fast as I dared, put the windows up, and after a while, it just stopped. I've been up that road many times since and even stopped to look around, but there really isn't much up there. To this day, I have no idea what it was. This is something that happened to me and a group of friends during a sleepover in 4th grade. There were 6 of us, including myself. During the day, we had planned to go out at midnight and play ghost in the graveyard. When midnight came around, we all grabbed some flashlights from his garage and headed outside. We played for a while, and then the first creepy thing of the night happened. While we were arguing over who was going to be the ghost next round, we heard the sound of someone running down the road. He lives in a cul-de-sac neighborhood that not many people live in, and it was around 1 a.m. We shined our flashlights at the road and saw nothing, but we kept hearing the sound of shoes on the road moving towards us. We looked up and down the road and saw nobody, and we were even able to shine a flashlight on the spot where the sound was coming from and follow it as the sound moved past us. Essentially, it sounded like an invisible man was running down the road past us, and we couldn't find out what made that noise. Eventually, the sound of someone running on the road past us, and we couldn't hear it anymore. We were all really confused for a moment, but we quickly brushed it off. We reasoned we had to be missing something, and there was a logical explanation for it. We quickly forgot about it and started playing again. After a while of playing more, we were getting bored. Then, one of us had the idea to go into the woods that were near his house and play the game there. Thinking back on it, I have no idea how we were all like, yeah, that sounds like fun, so we walked to the woods. It wasn't too dense, and we were looking for a good spot to make the safe zone. We walked into a clearing that was nearly a perfect circle with a rock in the middle. We thought this was perfect and said the rock was the safe zone. So, we quickly got back to playing in the woods. We pretty quickly found the second creepy thing that happened that night. While we were playing, it was like there were other people in the woods with us, and everyone noticed it at one point. We would finish a round, and someone would say, "Wow, I was chasing him when I noticed you in the tree. That was a crazy spot to hide." Then the other would look at him like he was insane and tell him he never climbed a tree. He would ask who it was then, and nobody could answer. Things like that happened every round. We would see people, and then when we were all together, we could confirm nobody was over there. We noticed it but didn't think much of it. Then the last creepy thing happened as we were about to head back to his house. Me and a friend started to walk back, while the other 4 stayed at the rock and talked there. As we were walking, we heard the 4 scream, run towards us, and then pass us. It scared me at first, and then I thought they must have been trying to scare us. I looked at my friend and laughed, then looked at where they had run from. In the trees, about 60 yards away from us, there was a figure peeking out from around a tree. It looked humanoid, but it clearly had a deer head. It scared the shit out of me, but I very quickly calmed down, realizing it was just a deer. Then I looked for another second and realized it couldn't be a deer. It was humanoid, and I saw one of its arms, and it looked like a human arm. I remember it pretty vividly. None of my friends had any clue to what we saw. We had believed it was a trick of the light or something like that. I had been thinking about this recently, and I have the idea that it could have been a wendigo. This happened in southeast Michigan, so I don't really know how likely it would have been for it to be a wendigo. Anyway, that's it. When I was 10, my dad passed away in a car accident. My grandma would always have dreams about him, and she would share them with the family, trying to see if there was any meaning behind them or what she thought about them. I don't have many dreams about my dad, but when they come, they feel so real. They almost never make sense when I try to explain them out loud, but it almost always feels like he's trying to show me or tell me something. Out of every dream I've had, there was one that I still can't explain to this day. I had this dream maybe a year after my dad passed. In my dream, my dad was holding hands with this woman, almost showing her off, like a look what I've got kind of deal. This is someone I've never met before in my life. I can recall her perfectly, though, the color of her hair, her dress, the smile on their faces as they stood in front of me, and I can never recall someone's face in a dream who I do not know. It's always contorted, blurry, or I never see their face at all. That's all the dream was, simple and to the point. Naturally, I had to tell my grandma about this dream. As I'm explaining to her what this woman looks like, she just goes quiet and listens intently. After I finished telling her about my dream, she pulled out a newspaper clipping, an obituary of a woman. I went stiff with goosebumps because I couldn't believe what was in front of me. It was her, every detail except without the color, and she wasn't in her white sundress. The day she died, before I was even born, my dad was there. She was crushed by a semi, and my dad went up to her and held her hand while she passed. He didn't even know who she was. This happened during the mid to late 90s, and we were maybe around 10 to 12 years old. On one camping trip, we went to this lake in the forest that was surrounded by a meadow, and feeding the lake was a small stream leading out of the woods. Anyway, we played in the meadow and streamed all day while my friend's dad fished. The lake wasn't very big, and because it had a meadow all around it, he could keep an eye on our whereabouts while he fished. While messing around by the stream, the wooded area it was coming from gave me weird vibes. I can't explain it, I just felt really uneasy. Anyway, the day faded away into early evening, and it was time to leave and find a camping spot. My friend's dad packed up his fishing gear, and we all walked back to the truck on this long, winding path through the woods. Once in the truck, we drove into a more remote area of the forest and made our way up this steep road that was so rough and at such an incline that I was convinced that my friend's dad was going to break his truck. He had a 4 or maybe 6-cylinder Toyota pickup that was about as basic as a truck could get. In fact, I'm not even sure if the truck had 4-wheel drive, but being an Alaskan outdoorsman with years of experience, I trusted him. We finally made it up to the top, which was flat and relatively open, with a big area of forest in the opposite direction from the road we drove up. We pitched our tents, got everything set up, and my friend and I decided to go explore the area. We were maybe 50 yards from the tent when we heard a big crack as a tree branch snapped in the woods behind us. We got quiet and looked in that direction, but did not see anything. Thinking it was just a deer, we brushed it off. As we were walking, we heard it again and whispered to one another about what it could be, but we kept going. It stopped briefly, and when we were about 200 yards from our camp, we sat on a boulder looking down the steep, wooded hill over the dirt road from where we had come from. Suddenly, we heard another cracking branch from behind. Whatever it was seemed to be following us. With our imaginations going wild, we came up with everything from a serial killer stalking us in the woods to deer to Bigfoot. When we got back to the campsite, we told her dad what we had heard and how it seemed to be paralleling us. He kind of played it off as a black bear and secured all the food. Later on, my friend confided in me that her dad had gotten out his pistol and would be sleeping with it that night. My friend and I were sharing one tent, and he was in his own tent not far from us, so we figured everything would be okay. I awoke sometime in the middle of the night to hear something or someone walking outside. As I lay still, listening, I could hear it quietly circling the tent. It sounded like it was walking on 2 legs because it had a distinct rhythm in how it walked. Whatever it was, it sounded big, as I could hear its weight, if that makes sense, as it put each foot down and walked. I could even hear relatively quiet but deep, heavy breathing at times. As I lay there listening, I could hear it wandering to the other parts of the campsite and then back to our tent, almost as if it were walking in a big, repetitive loop. This went on for who knows how long. It felt like an eternity. Terrified and unable to wake my friend, I lay there and listened until I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I told my friend and her dad about it, but I don't know if they believed me or not. Interestingly, absolutely nothing in the camp was disturbed in any way. The ground was not very soft, and in some places it was covered in grass, so there were no footprints either. This is something that I have never been able to explain and that, to this day, lingers in the back of my mind when camping. I always wonder what it was that walked around our tent all night. The year was 2003, and I was visiting my family in Puerto Rico for the summer. I was 11 years old at the time, and I am currently 24. I don't remember exactly what day it was, but it was shortly before the end of the vacation. As far as I recall, it was around the end of June 2003. I was spending the night at my cousin's house in Guavate, Puerto Rico, watching movies and playing board games. We had the front door wide open, with the storm door shut, so the air could get through the house. At around 1:30 in the morning, my cousins, my sisters, and I were getting tired. My eldest cousin, out of the 2, turned to me and asked me to go shut the front door. I begrudgingly obliged, and I headed to the door to shut it. The nail, almost the same size as mine, but much longer, with 3 fingers. Its hind legs were like those of a grown man and slightly toned. From what I could see in that 1 minute, its hind limbs seemed to only have 2 fingers. Its head was bulbous, and apart from the thick hair at the crown, it was only covered in very thin, lighter colored hairs. Its mouth was like that of a cross between a chimpanzee and a dog. Its lips were like chimps, but the mouth came to a small point like a dog. I could see two rather large fangs protruding from its mouth, which was slightly agape. The most haunting thing about this creature's appearance, though, were its large, oval-shaped eyes. They were about the size of large oranges, but with an eclipse shape. They were an insane amber color and shone like nothing I've ever seen, yet they seemed almost empty and dull at the same time. I could hear it breathing fairly softly but gurgly at the same time. I was frozen in place for what seemed like forever, but it couldn't have been longer than a minute because I remember my cousin saying, "That was fast." Once I snapped back to reality, I slammed the door shut and locked it. At that moment, I ran off, and I could hear it start to move outside in the gravel of the lawn. I then heard the bushes rustle. I went straight to my cousin's and sister's house and panicked, telling them what I saw. None of them believed me in the slightest. They would soon change their minds, as in the near future they themselves would have experiences similar to mine with different entities. As I stated before, up until I saw this creature, I was absolutely sure that nothing existed out there. In my mind, there were no siptids, aliens, or even ghosts and demons. Those things didn't exist and were bullshit to me. Then I had this encounter, lasting no longer than a minute, and my whole life changed. I was now a believer. I have since gone on to encounter other things. I want to know just what the hell I saw and if anyone else had had an encounter as close as mine with the same entity, or at least, one of its kind. I strongly believe that there are more than one of these in the world. As I previously stated, I don't know what it was, but I often refer to it as the infamous Chupacabras, only for lack of a better creature to call it. I can't think of anything else that, to my knowledge, fits this creature. So, therefore, that's what I will call it for now. A couple of months ago, me and one of my older cousins were standing outside of my house. He was having a cigarette. I'm not a smoker, but I was always reluctantly called outside at every smoke break. It was about 9 p.m., and with 4 cigarette breaks in, we'd pretty much run out of things to talk about. I opted for just looking into the night sky and gazing at the Big Dipper, it being the only star I could typically spot right away. As I'm looking up, I notice a dark silhouette, literally about 10 feet from the top of my house. I live in a 2-story home, so 10 feet from my roof is pretty high, but still close enough for me to still see. I could vividly see that it was the shape of a person flying from above my home and across the street, out of sight. It moved smoothly across the sky, not too fast, just at a glide. I stared in disbelief, unable to speak. Long after it vanished behind my neighbor's house, I still looked in its direction, trying to understand what just happened. When I finally was able to gather my thoughts enough to talk, I turned to my cousin, who was also looking into the sky, and said, "Let's go inside." He put out his cigarette, and we both walked into the house and sat in silence for about 5 minutes. The silence was broken by the sound of my cousin taking a deep breath before asking me, "Did you see something flying outside?" Before he could finish, I burst out into rapid sentences about what I saw. Before I knew it, we were both going back and forward, barely letting either get a word out. We decided that what we saw was real, and it really did happen. That's not the most terrifying part, though. A few weeks later, after my mind had finally calmed down a little, I stumbled across a TV show on Destination America entitled Monsters and Mysteries, I believe. The second episode I watched turned out to be based on sightings in Austin, TX. I couldn't believe it. The episode was about flying humanoids being spotted here in the city. It confirmed for me that what I saw was actually real, and I wasn't one of the only ones who'd spotted it. Rather, you believe me, do some research, or laugh it up and accuse me of being on drugs or watching too many Jeepers Creepers. I honestly don't care if you believe me or not. I still look to the sky on most nights. I know they're still out there. So this happened back when I was in 7th grade, and I was trick-or-treating with one of my friends in his neighborhood. So my friend and I started out at the neighborhood Halloween party and then continued out to the normal part and then the big art. Everything went smoothly and was fairly normal, but then we decided to go to the area with the houses that were very spaced out. We already had a lot of candy, so we weren't planning on staying too long. We went to 2 or 3 houses, and everyone was friendly and gave us candy, as usual, but then we went to this one house that had all of its lights on and a bowl of candy outside. It's probably worth mentioning that my friend and I could see a few adults sitting and talking in the living room of the house, or dining room, I don't really remember. Regardless, he and I ran up to the bowl and started shoveling as much candy as we could into our bags. We didn't stop until we heard footsteps in the house, then we booked it. We were just getting out of the driveway of the house when we heard a door open behind us. We started running down a small, paved path nearby and stopped to turn back and look to see if whoever came out of the house had followed us. We saw them in the driveway, walking around, as if looking for something. He and I decided it was probably a good idea to go back. We assumed that no one would actually follow us down the path just to try to get candy back, so we assumed we were safe. This is the part where things get creepy. As we were walking down the path, my friend and I would occasionally turn around and go, "Oh, look at that. It must be the person from the house." And then we'd run for a few seconds until we got tired of the joke. Obviously, this was fairly normal behavior for a couple of 7th graders hanging out on Halloween night. However, there was one point when my friend turned around and then stopped. I stopped with him. Dude?" I said to him, wondering why we stopped and what he was looking at. "Look over there," he said. "Where?" I asked. He pointed a ways from where we came, a little off the path. "There," he said. "Does that look like a person to you?" I wasn't entirely sure, and I was about to answer when suddenly this humanoid figure started moving. Without warning, both of us took off at the same time and ran all the way back to the Halloween party we came from. So I was out on my dirt bike up in the mountains doing what I do. I take a turn on a sketchy trail, but idiotically, I thought it was safe because it looked like it had been used a lot and there were fresh tracks. So as I begin on the trail, all is going fine. Mind you, my cousin was on his dirt bike as well, so I wasn't alone. We stop and take a rest at one point, and we check our gas. It got really quiet, like super quiet. No birds, no wind, nothing. We saw a hill and thought it would be cool to hike up it. We didn't notice how quiet it got, so we hiked up. We get to the top, and we sit there, looking down on the little creek. Now this is when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. I didn't say anything because I thought it was nothing. We then get up and turn around, and there's this wood behind us, and we thought we could find bones from an animal or a shed from a deer or moose. So as we walk, my cousin says he has to pee, so he goes off, and I am on my own here looking for bones. I hear something walking my way, like it's directly in front of me. I yell at my cousin to hurry up, so we just book it down this hill, but then my cousin says he dropped his keys. So we run up the hill, looking all over. I hear this thing start running, and then it makes a noise I have never heard from any other animal. So after this, we run down the hill, facing the fact that we may have to walk back to our cabin, which is about 2 miles away. And it was getting dark out. He spots something shiny, and it was his keys, so after that, we start our bikes, hurry home, and never return to that trail. And the worst part about it is that I saw the thing.